We've been dealing with endless lies, endless wars, endless inflation, endless printing, like literally endless oppression, you guys. Who is going to put an end to the endless? Okay. So that is obviously taking self-custody of your Bitcoin. Okay. Now, the second part of this is going to be not so easy for everybody to say. You are going to have to opt out of taxation at every level you can. Okay. And this is because you need to not only store your energy, but you need to tell them no. Okay. Because consent is energy. Okay. Your energy consenting to tyranny gives them more power in a spiritual sense.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's WolfNYC, WOLFNYC.com.
GMONEY, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Robert, it's been a long time. I'm excited to be here and I'm fired up.
Good. I love to hear that. We're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff today. Really talking about Bitcoin as a digital counterinsurgency and Bitcoin as a digital 1776. And this is a thesis that you originated. I think it's really interesting to ponder and talk about. And just by way of quick introduction, you are the host of Rug Pull Radio, and you're also the owner of a consultancy focused on Bitcoin self-custody. So let's just dive in. I don't exactly know where to begin, but right. I could just ask you a very broad question and let you take it from there. What has been happening over the past 100 years, I guess, in terms of monetary manipulation, statism, psyops? Like, what's going on? What brought us to 2023, and where are we today?
Yeah, I'd love to start in the past and get like this overall 40,000 foot view before we kind of get into the nitty gritty. And so, humanity overall is good, right? But we've let our guard down for a very, very long time. And so what we've allowed darkness to basically infiltrate and destroy us from within. And so we are now at this battle, right? We're fighting the greatest battle that we've ever fought for the foundation of freedom, right? Are we going to be a free nation? Or are we going to cede our rights to liberty and to the enemy, right? Are we going to give that up? All of us have a choice to make. This is probably one of the most important choices we have. And so, only when we stand together though, right? When we are united, can we defeat this highly entrenched dark enemy? Like this is an invisible enemy that can only be defeated when we are united, right? And so, their power and their control relies heavily on uneducated people, okay? Mm-hmm. A population that trusts without individual thought, a population that obeys without challenge. And so a population that remains outside of free thought and remains isolated, living in fear, right, in the closed loop chamber of these controlled mainstream media, propaganda. And so this isn't about politics, right? This has never been about politics. This is about preserving, right, our way of life and protecting the generations that follow, like full stop. I do believe we're living in these biblical times, and we are, kind of these children of light versus the children of darkness. And so how do we unite against the invisible enemy of humanity, right? And so let's start with the Titanic. Okay, let's just go back 100 years, right? And so there's some, conspiracies about the people that were on the Titanic were actually very heavily opposed to the creation of the Federal Reserve. And so funny enough, the Titanic sinks on April 15th, which is, you may know, it eventually became tax day. And so what happened after that? Well, Rothschild kind of screws over America, made our money worthless. The creation of the Fed, 1913, and then the IRS also created the same year as the Fed, which is, you could call that a coincidence. And then what do we have right after that, right? We've got World War I, 1914. Then we get the crash of 29, right? The crash of 29, they usher in new government, but then also we get the Reapportionment Act of 1929, okay? And so what that is, right, that actually froze a number of Congress people that gave us representation. So our representation has been diluted for over 100 years at this point, almost. And so if you think about that, our population keeps growing. However, our representation of our republic remains fixed. And so it's kind of like the opposite, in terms of Bitcoin, is how, our freedoms are getting diluted by a very small group of people. Again, tons of new government comes into the play. We've got, the CIA is blackmailing everyone, sex tapes, media consumed. And so, the country's actually forced hard left, right? They own the propaganda. They own the information tools. Population turns into puppets, but, there's certain uprisings like Kennedy, like Reagan, and then like Trump, right? They actually managed to kill Kennedy, and they actually put a bullet in Reagan. He lived. And you've got, JFK Executive Order 11110, which was in fact to rein in the power of the Fed. Okay, so we attempted it. He was assassinated, right? 1122.
3 months after that executive order, right?
Yeah, and RFK actually confirmed it when you asked him about it on a Twitter Spaces. So there's been a lot of confusion on what that executive order was, but in essence, RFK kind of confirmed our suspicions and what you fleshed out when you asked him that. And then you've got 1971, right? We've got the the fiat standard. We've got going off of gold, right? And you've got 1982. Now this is important because a lot of people overlook this, but in 1982. Ronald Reagan actually put out Executive Order 12369. It's called the Grace Commission. Funny enough, it was, he labeled it Drain the Swamp. But if you go back and look at that executive order and look at the essence of what that was, he goes and looks at the federal tax system. And in 1982, they realized not one single penny of your tax dollars go towards public service. Okay. Actually, most of it goes towards interest on the debt, right? And trying to collect and other stuff. And so, 1982, if you think about it, none of that actually going towards public service. Think about where we're at now. I mean, none of our taxes are actually going towards public service. And so enough lessons have been learned, possibly. And now we're finally ready to clean house. And so it's almost like the first time in 100 years, I feel we have a chance to finally fix the wrong of what's been happening for really, we're battling this 1,000-year-old death cult, but, in essence of, keeping it realistic here, let's just kind of, do that in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Really quick anyway.
Yeah. So I guess we would frame the enemy as the institution of central banking to generalize. Obviously it gets a bit beyond that, as you mentioned, with the 1,000-year-old cult. So, and then this institution has basically used arbitrary monetary supply inflation to tax people without representing, right? There's taxation without representation, which was one of the initial battle cries for the foundation of this country, obviously, in the Boston Tea Party. And I like how you said that it's not about politics, and you've immediately reminded me of one of my favorite phrases, and this is the opening lyrics to a song by the Police. The song is, "We are spirits in a material world." And they say that there is no political solution to our troubled evolution. Have no faith in Constitution. There is no bloody revolution. So it's like we've been trapped. Human history is this bloodbath, right? These cycles of memetic vengeance and violence. And we've been trapped in this. And we keep thinking that, violently overthrowing an existing power structure will fix things. And I guess it has created some progress, right? Like we got the decentralization of the U.S. constitutional republic through a bloody revolution.
Right.
But as we see today, the U.S. empire is clearly in decline. So that's not a political solution to human freedom. I don't think there is a political solution. But now we have this apolitical money, right? A social institution that human beings cannot corrupt. And that seems to be a fundamental phase change in this entire sequence of events of history. So let me ask you this. You mentioned the Titanic too. I guess I should just throw this out since we're going down the conspiracy rabbit holes. I can't, I've just heard this. I'm not attesting to its veracity, but there was that conspiracy going around when there was the recent sub that was exploring the Titanic.
Right.
That imploded ultimately, right? They were cut off, technical failure, the sub imploded. There was a conspiracy theory going around that was going to be used to restrict any further exploration of the Titanic, because apparently there was an explosion when the Titanic sank. Not hitting an iceberg, there was an explosion. And the theory goes that visual evidence would confirm that, right? That we would see the Titanic hull with blast patterns outward, right? There was a bomb or something on the Titanic. And that would confirm that the Titanic was sank purposefully or intentionally rather than accidentally.
Yeah, look, I mean, JP Morgan, right, was supposed to be on that boat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He owned the Maritime Mercantile Corporation that built that boat.
Right.
And an hour before it took off, he just miraculously said, you know what? I can't make it. And so, look, we're not going to speculate, but we're just going to say there's a lot of coincidences adding up to where, JP Morgan ended up becoming help create the Fed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. Like, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you this question because a lot of conspiracy theorists get lambasted with this ephemeral term, they. Like I always say, they do this, they do that, the powers that be, etc. Can we try and just define a little bit, like, who is they? What are these forces of darkness? Where do we circumscribe they?
Well, I think you can, call it or label it. You can label it the NWO, right? You can label it these 13 bloodline cult families, right? That, the CIA actually put out an entire document on it not too long ago. And so what I think we have is an insurgency, right? That has been controlling our institutions, our political governments, our, our education systems, big pharma. Now it sounds like a conspiracy, right? A couple of years ago, if I would have been talking about this stuff with you, you'd been like, dude, you're crazy. Like, that's nuts. But like now, I think, we're in this great awakening to where people are a little bit more open to the idea of, wow, what did this Epstein Island guy have? And why are all these politicians going to his island? And so I believe there is an elite group of people, right, that are controlling the levers of power through the banking system, right? Banks control governments, governments control people. And if you control the money, right, you can control the entire world. But,
right,
to kind of bring this back of what is inflation, right? This country was started on a tax revolt, right? Inflation is monetary manipulation. Inflation is taxation without representation. So how are we finally going to put an end to the endless in a way that is peaceful, right? I mean, there needs to be a peaceful transition of power. This isn't the military coming in to save us and basically, protect all of us, because we would have never learned anything from that. And so, what I like to talk about, which I think goes under the radar of a lot of Bitcoiners, is a gentleman by the name of John Perry Barlow. Okay. And so, he really didn't get into Bitcoin all that much, but, he wrote something called the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. And I want to just read a quick paragraph from that because I think it's really important for people to understand, right? And so by John Perry Barlow, he starts with, governments of the industrial world, you wary giants of flesh and steel. I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. Okay. We have no elected government, nor are we likely to ever have one. So I address you with no greater authority than that with which liberty itself will always speak. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement we have true reason to fear. And so, look, it goes on and into more of that. But, what I really want to help Bitcoiners get to the other side of is like, we don't have to negotiate anymore. Okay. We have a technology. We don't have to compromise. We shouldn't be looking at everything through the fiat lens of ETF approvals and government approvals and stuff. We no longer need their approval or their, acceptance into this new cyberspace realm that we have now empowered the individual with. And so what I'd like to do is go through some of my open source intel, like research, that maybe point to some kind of greater plan happening with Bitcoin. Maybe it wasn't so random, right? Maybe the Satoshi Nakamoto person, or entity is a little bit bigger in the whole context of things to where we should take a step back and really maybe see what else is going on over here.
Fascinating. So you're equating then Bitcoin basically, so the excerpt you just read, the author declaring the internet as a neutral territory where individuals are sovereign, governments have no sovereignty. Bitcoin is essentially the latest protocol layer of the internet, right? The internet, a stack of open source protocols for moving information without permission. Now we have Bitcoin as the latest layer that lets us move economic value or purchasing power around the world without permission. And that is a very effective countermeasure to government tyranny, because as you said, if you can control money, you can control people. Now we have money that cannot be controlled. So in theory, we have people that can resist that control by using a new form of money. So Bitcoin as this declaration of independence in cyberspace, can you decompose that a bit? What is the Declaration of Independence for those that don't know, and why is Bitcoin a declaration of independence in cyberspace?
People need to understand governments only get their power, okay, from our consent, right? Okay. And so that is a very important thing to understand. We consent, right? We institute governments to secure rights to secure our rights. However, their power comes from our consent. Okay. And a legitimate government cannot exist until the people have given their consent permission to be ruled by it. Okay. And so what you have now is you have people consenting to tyranny. Now, without, getting too crazy, I mean, we're in a system now to where we have a dementia patient in the White House who is sniffing children, kissing his own, relatives on the lips, which is, look, the emperor has no clothes. And so people need to understand that we have the power. We were given the perfect weapon to wield that is non-kinetic, that is peaceful. And we in cyberspace have no authority. They have no authority over us. And so when you get into this, I would even suggest that the internet was specifically built for Bitcoin. If you want to go that far into the equation, literally the entire plan of the internet was to eventually get us to Bitcoin. And so we've had enough technology over the years to where now we have this power system in cyberspace that not only was delivered to the people first, right? Governments and institutions have the last 7% to go after at this point in some degree. But, there is some information that I have that may point to this bigger plan. Okay. And so if we talk about biblical times, right, you talk about the Bible, and let's just bring up a quote, right? And so, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Okay. So it says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Now, money itself is not evil. However, the love of money transitions us into incentives for money, right? And so you could say, right, money, there is, the love of money is the fiat system is corrupt at its very core. Okay. And so what I wanted to bring into the picture is some interesting coincidences to where we have certain things happen. And so funny enough, I think we should maybe just get into this. The US government in 2009, January of 2009, put out a document on counterinsurgency. Okay. So United States government put out a interagency counterinsurgency initiative. Okay. And this is just a guide that was put out, funny enough, in January 2009. Okay. So January 2009, which we well know is the same month and year of the Genesis block. Okay. And so if you take counterinsurgency at its just explanation of what it is, counterinsurgency, right, the definition may be defined as a comprehensive civilian and military efforts taken to simultaneously defeat and contain insurgency and address its root causes. Okay. So counterinsurgency, simultaneously defeat and contain insurgency. Okay. Now, in the context of special operations forces, right? Special operations, JFK put this division together. Counterinsurgency is actually abbreviated as COIN. So the government agency put the abbreviation of this guide as COIN, funny enough. Okay. Another irregular warfare activity by these special operations forces is counter threat finance. Okay. And so we know bits of information is just digital. Okay. And we know the definition of coin per the US government is counterinsurgency. So Bitcoin perhaps is a digital counterinsurgency operation meant to address the root causes of political corruption, AKA fiat money. And so I'm just going to put these interesting coincidences together to help possibly build, some people's mosaic of information to figure out if these pieces make sense to them. And so, after Trump was defeated by Biden, right? A couple days after, there's this gentleman named Chris Miller who was in the Secretary of Defense, and he wrote about irregular warfare, and he helped issue in the counter threat financing coin man. Okay. And before we get into some of this stuff as well, let's define insurgency. Okay. Because insurgency, if we're counterinsurgents, what is the actual insurgency? Okay. And so there's multiple definitions of insurgency. There's political, there's military, there's all these different kinds. However, the CIA in January 20th of 2011, put together a guide for the analysis of insurgency. And funny enough, one of them is politically organized insurgency that talks about the objective is a shadow government created to undermine authority of existing and political consolidation that precedes military areas. Okay. And so this talks about this shadow government. And, if I would have brought this up again a few years ago, everybody would have thought it was crazy. But now maybe, there is some kind of man behind the curtain. But insurgency is primarily a political competition for legitimacy. Okay, this is important, okay, because counterinsurgency, insurgency, they're battling over legitimacy. Okay. And so if we talk about legitimacy, okay, we get back to consent of the governed. Okay. So if you understand legitimacy, right, that is a battle. This is an information warfare, right? You have the propaganda arm of the mainstream media battling for legitimacy. Hey, this vaccine is good for you. Hey, we need to go to war. Hey, we need to print more money, right? They are trying to attempt to tell you they're legitimate. right? By just repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And so when you talk about these shadow governments that own the levers of control, and you talk about insurgency, there was a gentleman that talked about shadow government or secret societies, and that gentleman was JFK. He talked about how secret societies are apparent to a free and open society. We'll just take the Wikipedia definition of a shadow government, right? The shadow government, cryptocracy, secret government, or invisible government is a family of theories based upon notion that real and actual political power resides not only with publicly elected representatives, but with private individuals who are exercising power behind the scenes beyond the scrutiny of democratic institutions. According to this belief, the official elected government is subservient to the shadow government, which is the true executive power. Okay. Look, I dumped a lot right there, so I don't.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. So, the internet, as I understand it, was built by DARPA. Correct me where I'm wrong there. I'm not 100% sure. And so, are you saying then that the internet was constructed with Bitcoin in mind, like as we were trying to build foundational layer to get to Bitcoin?
I just think that's something people should put in their minds. I'm not necessarily claiming that, but I think there's a high correlation that, look, everybody in our military isn't bad. Okay. Everybody in our military isn't good, but for Bitcoiners and other people in general to label everybody in the military, everybody in the power structure bad is it doesn't pass the polarity test, right? Like, not everybody is evil. There are a lot of good people out there too. Okay. There are good people in the essence of JFK, Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump. Like, these are people who have been fighting for individual rights. And so if you go back and look at that, maybe there are some people that knew about this plan of the central bank digital currency, right? Maybe they forethought gamed out this perspective of how are we going to fully control people when our financial system fails? Because inevitably they know it will fail at some point. They know the fiat currency at some point will fail. And so, but again, how do we defeat this entrenched enemy, right? How do we defeat this dark, invisible enemy that has been around for a very, very long time?
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, iCoin Technology. iCoin has just released a sleek new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone with a little touch screen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, no GPS. It's a strictly physically cold hardware wallet. Like I said, it's got a high-res 3-inch touch screen. It's got a camera for air gapping the wallet. It's got optional Bluetooth compatibility. And it's really a brand new UI, UX experience for a hardware wallet, making it very accessible, easy to use, not intimidating. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like iCoin Wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. Go to iCointechnology.com today and use promo code Bitcoin23 for 30% off of this new sleek hardware wallet.
Yeah. And let me ask you something else about that too. So you mentioned the Bible verse, right? The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Obviously, money is power, right? It is in terms of political power, right? It also has some rooting in physical power. This is a question we get into a lot. Jason Lowery's thesis kind of connects the dots on this a little bit, that money is a form. It has its basis. It's a tool for exerting political power, but it's sort of rooted in physical power, right? You need proof of work to produce money. That's why gold was an effective money. That's why Bitcoin's an effective money. So if money is power, then the love of money is the love of power, right? So we're saying this is kind of the evil, again, not pointing to any individuals per se, but it's almost like the Solzhenitsyn view, right? That the line between good and evil runs down the heart of every man, that there's this evil potential in all of us. And if we start to love money or power above loving one another, then we tilt, we shift that line, right? We move more into the evil side of being human. And this reminds me of, I think this may have been Bob Marley. He said, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, mankind will know peace. And so perhaps this counterinsurgency, which again, as you defined, insurgency versus counterinsurgency as a battle for legitimacy, this is the ideological struggle, I guess, over what the controlling narrative will be, right? Is it top-down, political power being exerted and imposed on a population? Or is this going to be the counterinsurgency of people being self-sovereign, self-directing, etc.? So what is it about Bitcoin that can shift us away from the power of love towards, shift us towards the power of love rather than the love of power?
Yeah, and you framed that pretty well. And so, Bitcoin debases the state, okay? Mm-hmm. So the state is always attempting to do what they think is best for you, right? But in essence, they're doing what's in best for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. They're taking to consolidate and protect their own power versus protecting our rights. Mm-hmm. And so Bitcoin is that ultimate weapon of power. But, in this battle, right, incentives matter. Okay. And so I believe we're in this spiritual battle. This isn't just a battle of wits. This is a spiritual battle. And I believe us rebel souls that are being pulled out in this natural selection process, right? People maybe find that arrogant, but Bitcoiners are being pulled out of this matrix. Okay. Mm-hmm. And our incentives are aligned with helping others. Like, Bitcoiners are the greatest people on the planet, right? Because they are always looking to help another person. And they're always looking to educate them on how we remove, the illusion of the fiat system, right? And so their power comes from the dollar, which at this point is just a belief system, right? It's a legitimate belief system. But do we believe in the legitimacy of the dollar? Well, that's based upon the propaganda of the mainstream media. And so how do we delegitimize the dollar, right? Well, Bitcoin delegitimizes the dollar. Bitcoin is legitimate, battle of legitimacy. Bitcoin is truth. Bitcoin is freedom versus, this other thing over here that just gets printed ad nauseum that steals energy from us. And so, that's a whole picture of what we're fighting here, I think.
And then how does the coin, can you revisit the coin manual? What is this document? What was the purpose of this document? When was it produced? And how does this fit into the Bitcoin counterinsurgency narrative?
Right. So this thing was put out by the U.S. government in January of 2009. Okay. And really, it talks about how...
Sorry, January 2009. So that's
January 2009.
The date of the Genesis block, right?
Correct. And so obviously...
timing.
Very interesting timing. And so, they're not going to, obviously, if this is a covert operation, they're not going to come out and say this is obviously about Bitcoin, right? But let's just say it's a coincidence, right? There's that coin term again, coincidence. It's all mathematics. But, the comprehensive approach to a counterinsurgency is information, security, and economic, that funnels into a political strategy that equals total control. And if you think about Bitcoin, well, it's information, it's security, and it's economic. And at the end of it, it all pulls into political strategy, but it's apolitical, right? And so what you find is this control structure being able to be broken up. But this is just a guide. Okay. This was just a guide put out. Now, funny enough, okay, if we get to we get to 2000. Actually, before we get to that, I want to put a couple of the things out because I think it's important to understand another component of, people, okay, GMoney, like you've got this coin manual, that's pretty cool, but like, what else? Like, is there something more to to some of the research you've been doing? And so let's just bring up a general who talked about Bitcoin back in 2015. He said, Bitcoin, the rise of digital currency may be a matter of evolutionary destiny. Understand it because it will happen. And so this was put out by General Flynn on February 1st, 2015. Now, I believe in dates as being very significant. For those that don't know, February 1st is National Freedom Day, right? It's the day honoring the signing of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that abolished slavery. And so if you think about Freedom Day, right, they're literally saying like, hey, you guys are all slaves in a prison you can't touch, taste, or smell, but you don't know it yet because, you're stuck in this fiat system. You're stuck in this illusion. And so a few months later, the Department of Defense puts out a law of war manual. Okay, again, all this stuff is open source information. Anybody can go look up the law of war manual put out by the Department of Defense in June of 2015. Okay. And so I know about, JFK, 11.11.0. So funny enough, Chapter 11 talks about military occupation. Okay. Chapter 11, Section 11.22 specifically calls out wartime currency. Okay, so I want to go through some of the points of 11.22 in this Department of Defense Law of War Manual. This isn't me talking. This is so I like to look at everything from a game theory military perspective in this battle we're fighting. And so 11.22, public finances and taxes. Okay, the occupying power may leave the local currency of the occupied area in circulation. The occupying power may also authorize domestic authorities to reissue currency if necessary for ensuring public order and safety. The occupying power may introduce its own currency into the occupied area or issue special currency for use in the occupied area territory should the introduction of issuance of such currency be necessary. Okay. The issuance of occupation currency may be necessary to counteract the enemy's state practice of engaging in economic sabotage. The occupying power may also set exchange rates for currency. Occupying powers to regulate currency must not be used to confiscate private property. And then the last part here is, for example, intentional debasement of currency by the establishment of fictitious valuation or exchange rates or like devices, as well as failure to take reasonable steps to prevent inflation with the result of enrichment of the occupying power would violate international law. We have a Department of Defense Law of War manual saying inflation violates international law. Wow. And again, this is put out 11.22. We all know JFK was assassinated 11.22. It is Chapter 11. I believe in the power and magic of certain numbers. We can get into that in a separate thing. But, I can give us some examples of war currency that's happened over time too, right? And so during our own Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress issued currency for the use in British territory, occupied by the colonial troops before the Declaration of Independence. The rebel government of the Confederate States issued a war currency, which, as we've seen, was held valid by the Supreme Court of the United States. Moreover, the United States and her allies in World War II issued occupation currency in Sicily, Germany, and Austria. The combined chief of staffs of the Supreme Allied Commander issued directive June 24, 1943. But besides regular U.S. coins, yellow sealed dollars, and besides regular British coins, British military authority notes to supplement lire currency. And so if we are in this battle is not an American battle. This battle is not a European battle. This battle is not an Asian. This is a worldwide battle, right? We've got the Federal Reserve, the IMF, the BIS, right? The BOJ, the Bank of England, BOE. And so this is everywhere. And so if you think about how do you fight a war with an entrenched enemy that is literally everywhere, and the only way to save it is for humanity to basically take their power back. And so I think it begs the question of what is really going on with Bitcoin behind the scenes. Now, not only was the coin guide put out, okay, it was just a guide, okay? It was just a guide that was put out. However, in 2018, Joseph Dunford, right, made coin a doctrine. Okay, so he actually converted the guide into an actual doctrine. Secretary of Defense, this is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Coin becomes a doctrine. It like gets legs to actually become, an implemented military strategy. And so, I just find all of this very interesting. Again, I'm not claiming anything. I'm just saying, hey guys, we should probably look at this and probably wake up because, we are at battle against an infinite player. I don't know if you played the games back in the day, right? Of like the Nintendo, and there was a thing called the Game Genie. And if you stuck the Game Genie, right, on a game, you could like fly all over the place, kill everybody. You could basically do whatever you wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so, the central bankers are this Game Genie. They have the infinite power to basically do whatever they want. And all they care about is continuing the game. They don't, they just want the game to continue, right? The infinite player versus a finite player, right? We get into this game theory aspect of it. And so the infinite player, they just want to keep the game going. However, Bitcoin, right, has changed the central bankers from an infinite player to a finite player. The infinite player, the central bankers now have a clock. They have to defeat Bitcoin by a certain point where they lose forever. Okay. Bitcoin puts the clock on their infinite player strategy. They can no longer use the infinite player. They have to do whatever they can, printing money, doing wars, propagating lies, COVID, right? All this stuff to try and beat Bitcoin. And so here we are in this game. And, I think a lot of Bitcoiners still think they can negotiate with tyrants. You cannot vote or negotiate your way out of this. Look, I wish it was that easy. I wish we could just vote and just move on from this, but I don't believe it's going to be that simple. I believe we have to stop looking at everything through a fiat lens and trying to shove Bitcoin into ETFs and shove Bitcoin into this fiat lens of the world. And we need to go out and create our own new world, guys. This is our space. We've been given a sovereign territory with no rulers, just rules that we can go create. So why are we trying to negotiate? We have the high ground. We have no incentive to negotiate because we know what they've done to us for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And so this is a movement of the people, Robert. Mm-hmm. This has always been a movement of the people. And I put a lot out there. So
I agree with that. I agree with that loudly. Actually, that's one of the components of my mission statement is Bitcoin is a humanitarian movement to undermine and subvert the greatest con in human history, which is the central bank, right? The idea that money needs to be centrally planned, controlled, manipulated, counterfeited at scale for the good of society, right? To dampen the business cycle, to stabilize prices, all of these really nonsensical things when you start to peel back the layers and you get into Austrian economics and you realize actually it's the debasement of money or the counterfeiting of currency that drives the business cycle. The stabilization of prices is a farce, right? Prices are just exchange ratios that move in the marketplace all the time based on supply and demand. Price stability is just, it's an illusion. And so in this picture you're painting, are Bitcoiners then the occupying power that we've occupied this new digital sovereign space, and that we are doing that through this insurgent technique that you described from the manual, that we're basically issuing our own money, right? It's our own money to take back control. And you mentioned too that I think it was in section 1122 that there should be an inability to violate private property, and that inflation itself was antithetical to international law. I mean, there is no money that does that other than Bitcoin. I guess you could argue physical gold, but the limitations of physical gold is what got us into the fiat currency fiasco in the first place, right? It has to be centralized to scale as a monetary technology. And when you centralize gold in one place, you go from full reserve to fractional reserve to zero reserve fiat, right? The corruption sort of coalesces around that concentration of power. So is Bitcoin, it's almost like a checkmate, I guess, on the notion of fiat itself, right? This idea of some people can control other people by decree. And that is also antithetical to the reality of each of us being self-owned, self-controlled, self-directed. So when you say, I guess, Bitcoin is the tool we are using as this occupying power in this new territory, is this effectively the ultimate level playing field? Like, what humans have always been striving towards, how do we, consent by the governed, equality in the eyes of the law, the sovereignty of the individual is intended to be the cornerstone of the state in the West, right? Where the sovereignty of the individual is superordinate to the sovereignty of the state. But we've never been able to realize those ideals because they've always just been scribbles on a piece of paper. But now we have this actual technological implementation and incentive structure that promotes that ideal and instantiates that ideal in a way that no scribbles on paper ever could. As you said, rules, not rulers. There's also been this theory of a rules-based order globally, all right? That's what the United States was supposed to be on top of. But as we've seen, these rules continually get broken, twisted, changed to favor those that can, against those who cannot. So is that what Bitcoin is? Like, it's an ultimate level playing field? And then if it was, has it been, what is this movement? What is it? So these are people that maybe see the shadow government for what it is, and they've subtly introduced something that undermines and subverts the possibility of shadow governance itself?
Yeah, look, there's only one way through this, okay? Which is a permissionless, immutable system, okay? Because we've been captured by incrementalism, right? Every time something gets captured, incrementally, they increase their grip on us, right? Oh, well, we need a tax for that. Oh, we need to increase the taxes on that. Oh, you know what? You need a license for this. Oh, you know what? You need something for that. And so at every step of the way, they have captured us, and they incrementally make it worse every year. Okay. And with the system of Bitcoin, it erases all of that. It debases their power structure. It debases their incrementalism, because you can't have it both ways, right? And so at the end of this, like, we don't need an IRS, right? Taxation is a farce. Taxation is a form of control. Okay. However, we have to understand that and take the power back, right? A lot of people are very timid. They're shy. They're afraid. But, as RFK said, like, isn't there things that are worse than dying? Isn't there things that are worse than being in prison? And so we need to realize we have the power as the people, right? This is a movement of the people. This is power. This is essentially the ultimate transfer of power back to we, the people. Okay, this is the Constitution on super steroids, that it has nuclear capability, and nothing can stop it. And so, I like to, as you went back to that police thing, but there is no political solution to a financial revolution. We are destroying them block by block without firing a shot. Okay. And so I like to put all this into this, thing to where, Bitcoin is an information system. Bitcoin is a communications tool. Bitcoin is a store of value. Bitcoin is a currency. Bitcoin is a set rule of law. Bitcoin is a weapon. But Bitcoin is a declaration of independence in cyberspace for everyone. So declare your freedom. But funny enough, okay, now this all sounds really good, G, but like, how do we revolt against the powers that be, right? And a lot of this is abstract thinking, right? A lot of this is like, we fear what's in the media because it's constantly put on us. However, funny enough, there was this report put together by Chenoweth, who looked up nonviolent protests over a long period of time. Okay. And, so many people that are probably listening to this were like, this guy's crazy. I want nothing to do with him. But I'm not looking for the sheep. I'm looking for the lions, right? Because the sheep aren't going to do this. It takes strong men to build the bridge to get across. And so the masses will come once we've built that bridge and once we've been emboldened with the powerful, strong men that'll bring us there. And so, what does this say? Well, this study talks about how you only need 3.51% of a society to peacefully revolt against the powers that be. Okay. So what does that mean? That means every peaceful revolution almost in history has been 100% successful with only 3.51% of the population. Okay. So I don't need everybody. We don't need everybody in this battle. We only need that 3.51%. Once we get to that threshold, there's really nothing they can do to stop us at that point. If we all got up tomorrow and said, hey, guess what? We're going to stop paying taxes. We're going to stop filing our taxes. What are you going to do? Right? It's the ultimate FU. Not only that, it's game theory. If you go lock me up for not paying my taxes, I'm just going to hold on my Bitcoin longer. I get free room and board. I get to hang out and whatever. Like, it's not ideal, obviously. But once we get to this threshold, there's nothing they can do to stop us. And so 3.5% is that threshold of active engagement. That success is deemed to be guaranteed. And if we get even a higher level of support, it's already done.
Is that 3.5%? Do you think this is a percentage of global population holding Bitcoin, or is this a percentage of global cash balances held in Bitcoin?
See, that's what I don't know. I think it's more of about a self-custody possibly thing. If we can get 3.5% of people to self-custody their Bitcoin and refuse to, play by their rules, right? Refuse consent of their tyranny. We have nothing to lose at this point. Like, you could have said 5 years ago we weren't there yet. And I agree with you. Okay. A few years ago we were not there at all, but now we are. We are well past the beyond of where we can take our power back. And again, the 3.5% threshold is something that's been studied. This is something that I can, again, this article is out there. It's on the BBC. And it says the 3.5% rule, how a small minority can change the world. And so we are changing the world in a non-violent way. Because again, we don't have access to F-16s. We don't have access to, we're not going to kinetically go against our military. That's just insanely stupid, right? And doesn't make sense. Civil war doesn't make sense. However, the military isn't going to come to everyone's door and ask for their seed phrase, right? Like, that's an impossible world to where, people need to really think about what it means to be a Bitcoiner. Are you going to consent? Are you going to file against a voluntary system that is meant to rob and steal from you? Or are you going to take power back yourself and refuse the tyranny? Okay, now this isn't easy for everybody to understand. I'm attempting to move the Overton window here because we need to do this. Okay, we are the Minutemen. We are the revolutionaries, right? In the revolution, the military didn't step in and defeat Great Britain, right? It was a bunch of farmers that shot the first couple of shots and said, hey, guess what? Your tax, we're not going to pay it anymore. This country was built on tax revolt. Bitcoin is a tax revolt for the entire world. Okay, Bitcoin debases the state at every level. And you're either on part of that program or you're not. And so again, I'm not looking for the sheep. I'm looking for the lions. I'm looking for those that are ready to take the battle directly to the bankers' doorsteps, because we're not fighting governments. We're fighting bankers at the end of the day. And instead of the bankers, right, doing the bubble, doing the reset, doing the wars, and repeating that sequence over a long period of time, we're going to change that, and we're going to take the battle directly to the bankers.
Yeah, this the 3.5% reminds me of the minority rule, which Taleb wrote about, I think, in his book Anti-Fragile. But there's a lot of instances where the preferences of an obstinate minority can impose their preferences on a majority. Like, so long as the majority is a little bit agnostic. That he gives the example of halal meat, right? There's like 4% of people that will only eat halal meat. I hope halal is the right term, or was it kosher? Halal or kosher?
Same thing.
Yet 96% of the meat produced in the area he studied was halal, because the majority actually doesn't care. They don't care if it's halal or kosher or not. So the fact that this small minority was very obstinate in their preference, it led to the vast majority of meat being produced according to their preference. He gives several other examples, but this is really what has moved the Overton window historically, right? It's the preferences of a very motivated and obstinate few that get impressed on the majority. And it seems like, Bitcoin has this fixed rule set. So it's like the ultimate form of obstinacy in a way. You can't even change it if you wanted to. So if you just get the right threshold, the critical mass of adoption, I would lean more towards cash balances. I think today Bitcoin is roughly 0.5% of global cash balances. And so I think that probably that 3.5, Taleb gives the numbers like 2 to 4%. When you get to that, say 2 to 4% number, that's when this minority rule starts to kick in and Bitcoin will really accelerate in its monetization.
Yeah, look, Mark Twain, right, had a famous quote, and he said, "In the beginning of change, the patriot is a scarce man, and brave, and hated, and scorned. When his cause succeeds, the timid join him, for then it costs nothing to be a patriot." So, yeah, like I said, the strong men need to build this bridge of this peaceful revolution, because the timid are never going to join us, right? The timid, they're scared, they love their chains, they would rather be controlled, right, than stand up for freedom. And so we need to flip that script. Bitcoiners need to lead this charge. Okay. Now I know this sounds great to everybody, but people still want more information. Why, do you come up with some of these things on where your thesis comes from? And so we're going to go to 2017, because 2017 right now was a crazy year. Okay. And so the first thing I'm going to say before I introduce this topic is I'm going to go for a quote from Wayne Dyer, who says, "The highest form of ignorance is when you reject something you don't know anything about." Okay. I've been studying this topic for over 6 to 7 years. Okay. There was a anonymous person in 2017 that started to drop information on 4chan and 8chan by the entity known as Q. Okay. And so for those that don't know what Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. You may notice my hat has a 17 on it, right? But for those that don't know, a Q level clearance, okay, is a access to authorization, is the highest security clearance within the Department of Energy. Okay. Top secret restricted data, formerly restricted data, and national security information, as well as secret restricted data, as defined as the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, and covers nuclear weapons and related materials. Okay, so I'm just giving you some context of what Q or a Q level clearance might possibly perhaps mean. Okay, and so currently, the information that we're chosen to consume, right? 90% of our media is with 6 corporations. Okay, 232 media executives control the information of 277 million Americans. Wow. 300 million Americans. Okay, so if you think about that, we have a consolidation of media, a centralization of media. Okay, and so what this entity did, Q, some people call it QAnon, and people are already going to be like, "Oh my gosh, Reed loves having the Q guy on." Yes, okay, but we need to talk about this, because this is just information that nobody still knows who this anonymous person is. Okay, but the information it contained was very powerful. And so if you were going to take down a centralized media organization, you would need to decentralize information and how it got out to the people. Okay. This entity would drop Socratic questions on these chat boards that were timestamped, that were digitally verified, that were signed. And, the entity mentioned timestamps as being a very important thing. Some people call Bitcoins, some people call them stamps. Right? Coin is just an abstract term for whatever, we want to call it, and you could call it stamps. Mm-hmm. And so how do we break up the mainstream media into, decentralizing that? Well, again, this information would get dropped on these 8chan and 4chan boards. Okay. And anons, right? Like people like us would just go in and find out what the information was. They would ask, what is the NWO? What is the, why is the Federal Reserve a privately owned company sitting on its own very patch of land and immune to U.S. laws? So it would just ask all these random questions, and we would go out and search up the information online, and we'd post about it. And so if you think about it, these things were done almost similar to like a Bitcoin system, to where we were kind of the nodes, they would put these breads in these different, they were living like chat subjects, and a bread would actually compile all the information. And at the top, at the end, it would like take the most relevant information that made sense, and it would post it at the end and be like, this is what makes sense. Now, it wasn't, perfect in that sense. A lot of people had differing views, but what it basically told us was that like, hey, maybe there's a pedophile elite shadow government that controls everything through blackmail. And look, don't take my word for it, right? I'm not trying, look like Satoshi. If you don't get it or don't understand it, I don't have the time right now to explain it to you. What I'm saying is Q was listed as one of the 25 most influential people in Time magazine. Okay. 15 of us on Twitter, we were getting over 1 billion impressions per month before we were all kicked off. Okay. And so like this happened. I'm sure everybody has heard of this anonymous individual. However, if you were going to introduce and propagate this war, how would you get past the mainstream media? You would have to go around that system in any way possible to get information out to the people that goes against the narrative. Okay. Not only did we get out information on different subjects like banking, like big pharma, like, certain politicians and Epstein Island and, all this crazy, conspiracy stuff, right? But it introduced the idea of memetic warfare, okay? Which I think a lot of Bitcoiners still maybe don't understand, but military memetics are a very important piece of getting around the mainstream media. So funny enough, DARPA, again, actually did some definitions of what is a meme, right? And so, the meme origin, you probably know it comes from, Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, a book written in 1976. And, it defined it as a self-reproducing and propagating information structure analogous to a gene in biology. And so what happens is you get these trending memes and they just propagate and they explode and they make certain connections in your mind that is unable to be done through words. Mm-hmm. Okay. It is a subset of neurocognitive warfare, a revolutionary tool in the information war. Okay. It can provide coherent scientific approach for information operations, psychological warfare, and general war against terrorists. It can prevent or mitigate irrational conflict, reduce the probability of war. So you have these memetics that were put out, and one of them was Pepe the Frog. Funny enough, the purpose of military memetics, one of the things is to develop a new approach to countering terrorists and insurgents before they become terrorists, and insurgents influencing beliefs in a scientific way. So it actually has an insurgency hit in the DARPA files to where they're looking at what is military memetics. And so, what is an example of a meme? Like it's contagious information pattern, right? And it replicates by parasitically infecting human minds and altering their behavior, causing them to propagate the pattern. Individual slogans, catchphrases, melodies, icons, inventions, fashions are all memes. And so what you have is the meme of Bitcoin. You have the meme of Pepe. You have the meme of all these different influencers putting out that are literally an attack vector against centralized, weaponized media in a decentralized way because of how these images actually work. And so I would say that the war of Bitcoin to go mainstream went live with the election of Donald Trump. Okay, now I'm going to probably get a lot of flack for that too, because not a lot of people like Donald Trump in the Bitcoin space, but a lot of Bitcoiners are very emotional. People need to get over their emotions. Emotions is what decompartmentalizes you, right? Emotions compartmentalize you into these categories and boxes to where you can't expand your thinking. And so people need to, Trump's election caused a visceral reaction with a lot of people. Trump was the chaos in the controlled matrix that we lived in. He was the wrench thrown into their machine that all of a sudden everybody had an opinion on. Okay. Now, why do I say this? Well, for one, there's proof in the power of Bitcoin. If you look at the actual hash graph of Bitcoin, when the hash rate actually takes off, it's after when Trump comes into office and then after when Space Force gets initiated. Okay. Now, a lot of Bitcoiners don't know it was actually Trump. Again, this isn't political. All right. Right. This isn't political. I'm just pointing out facts. Trump and his Treasury Secretary hired a gentleman by the name of Brian Brooks. Okay. During COVID, people don't understand that it was Steve Mnuchin who hired Brian Brooks that actually made it legal for banks to custody Bitcoin in the United States. Okay. That was not accessible before that happened. And Trump did think this gentleman did such a great job. He actually hired him for another term, for a full term, because he was a temporary hire. But the Congress did not actually confirm him. But again, it was already too late. Bitcoin was established. It was legal. And Steve Mnuchin, Brian Brooks made Bitcoin legal for banks to custodian. It happened all the way back in 2018, 2019. I forget. Anyways, so again, getting kind of more into this, we get into Space Force. Now, what is Space Force? Right? Everybody thinks Space Force is maybe it's outer space, maybe it's cyberspace, right? What exactly is this new entity that Trump created? But we do know there is a definite, correlation between the hash rate and Space Force getting established. Okay, whatever that means. Okay, and I think a lot of Bitcoiners are not interested in war, right? And that's great. I don't want war. I don't think we should be in these wars for a long time. I think war has been stealing from us and making us ignorant to the fact of the fiat central bankers. But let's take a quote from Leon Trotsky, who says, "You may not be interested in war, Anon, right? But war is interested in you, right? Whether you like it or not." And so people have to kind of reconcile with that to understand the war we are fighting. Okay. And that's basically what my entire research and thesis is about. And so I didn't have all these pieces, Robert, right? I was putting together some of this coin stuff and some of this other stuff. And I really didn't know how to frame Bitcoin as a weapon. Like I had no idea how to do it, right? Because I just am not that smart. However, we get this gentleman by the name of Jason Lowery come out in August of 2021. Funny enough, I found this guy immediately on LinkedIn and I immediately started posting stuff with him. And, he talked about mutually assured preservation, a case for Bitcoin as the fourth leg of the U.S. strategic deterrence. Now, funny enough, Jason's thesis is primarily about nation states settling disputes. However, I almost think his thesis is almost like a red herring, because I think his thesis is really about people being powered to fight against their own tyrannical governments. Because if you think about Bitcoin as a weapon for nation states, right, as this ultimate nuclear weapon they can use, it literally gives the power of nuclear weapons into the hands of everybody, right? Like, we're not going to go fight with F-16s and tanks and all these we don't have access to that as people, right? We don't have all these crazy kinetic guns to fight wars with. However, if humans were given the same level of power to fight things with as nation states, in essence, right, we are on par with the most powerful energy or powerful weapon they have, right? Which is, at this point, would be in a peaceful way in a digital war, would be Bitcoin, right? We are an equal playing field. They can't come after us and say, "Oh, your tool or your weapon can be used to harm other people," right? Because it's non-kinetic. It's just information. And so we have, Jason Lowery, who's basically told to write this thesis by, CSO Raymond and the Joint Chiefs of Staff General C.Q. Brown. Okay, so these are gentlemen that are military leaders that are very important, as I believe, as part of this operations plan. And so, I'm just going to put a quote out from Lowery, and it talks about sapiens. After sapiens suffer enough losses, they eventually become willing to do what surviving animals already do: project physical power to settle their disputes, establish control, authority over their resources, and achieve consensus on the legitimate state of ownership and chain of custody of their property. People who are eventually willing to spend the injury and risk the energy to secure the resources they value the way nature demands from every other animal in the wild. Okay. So Jason comes out with this amazing thesis. Okay, by the way, I think it's the most important work since the Satoshi white paper because it breaks down the domestication of human beings and how we've been domesticated for a very, very long time.
And this is his book, Softwar.
Correct. This is a Softwar thesis. And so, I pulled some clips out of it, and so, as being a red herring for nation states to battle each other, right? He puts some little interesting blurbs in here and talks about Americans as insurrectionists, okay? People who are defiant to abstract power, dismissive of rank, disloyal to their king, and capable of we were highly motivated to kill thousands of redcoats to delegitimize their oppressive king, okay? Their abstract power, right? This is what happened in 1776, right? Mm-hmm. We were tired of the abstract power being over in England, right? Telling us what to do. The U.S. Constitution gives American citizens the right to free speech and the right to bear arms for the explicit purpose of empowering American citizens to delegitimize the abstract power of their government if it becomes too abusive or systematically exploitive, just like the British monarchy did in the 1700s. Whoa. Okay. Jason is telling you, you can delegitimize their legitimacy. Okay. Mm-hmm. It comes back to coin. It comes back to insurgency. It comes back to all of this battle for legitimacy because we now have the power. Bitcoin or bit power is for the explicit purpose for citizens to delegitimize the abstract power of the dollar or the state. Okay. And so insurgency is primarily this political battle for legitimacy, right? Mm-hmm. How do you delegitimize that power?
I want to jump in here. So this is a very contentious topic in Bitcoin circles. Jason Lowery is a very controversial figure. He catches a lot of flack because he is a member of U.S. Space Force. A lot of people call him a spook, other terms of derision because he works inside the U.S. government. But I think those that have actually listened to his presentations, he's appeared on this show several times, or read his book, I would say he's anything but that, right? He is asserting that Bitcoin is one of these step changes in human socio-political organization, right? Almost like a new form. He caught a lot of flack for the framing as a weapon. And this is tricky because one of the things I've learned doing this show and exploring the nature of Bitcoin itself, you really run into the limitations of language. And I think that's why we describe Bitcoin as so many different things. This is also why we describe money as so many different things. And that it serves different purposes in different contexts. And Jason takes this framework as, warfare basically being the final measure or the last measure of dispute resolution over private property or territory. And humans have this animal impulse to project power, to expand territorial dominion or acquire property, right? It's sort of in us as a territorial species. And he's basically looking at Bitcoin as an alternative channel for projecting that power, right? Rather than projecting power in the domain of kinetic warfare, we can now project power in this global Bitcoin mining competition, right? To actually serve the same function, right? Determining the proper ownership of property and the state and chain of custody, as he says. And so when you say it's a weapon, this is where he catches a lot of flack. But when I read some of the military documents about the nature of warfare, they emphasize the point that it's what is this called? Maneuver warfare, right? Warfare is move, counter move. There's not actually a bright line between offense and defense, right? We say this in football too, right? The best offense is a good defense. Defense wins championships, things like that. And so for me, I don't know, this is just a point of humility I think people need to take. They get very entrenched, like, oh no, it's not a weapon, it's a shield. Like as if the word changes the nature of Bitcoin, which it absolutely does not. And for me, that emphasizes Bitcoin's almost transcendental nature, right? It's very difficult to define, just like money is very difficult to define. So I don't think it's any coincidence. Bitcoin is money, money is Bitcoin. These are both very difficult to define in words. And as I wrote, and so that can lead you to these somewhat paradoxical conclusions. And as I concluded my piece, Masters and Slaves of Money, which is one of the most popular things I ever wrote, towards the end, I said Bitcoin is a weapon of peace, actually, which sounds paradoxical. But in the framework of what you're describing here is we have been existing under tyrannical political hierarchies since time immemorial. And Bitcoin is the exit, right? Or the opt-out. It is, I don't know if you want to call it a weapon or a shield, but it is an ability to subvert, exit, and ultimately overthrow the very premise of the argument that we need political hierarchies to organize human beings. And it does that. And it's like, okay, that sounds radical. Well, why? What is that? Well, as we've described earlier, insurgency and counterinsurgency is this battle over legitimacy, right? What is the controlling narrative going to be? Well, what is Bitcoin? It is this legitimate, truthful, and unalterable narrative structure, right? Whatever is in the time chain it's inarguable, incontrovertible. It's something like the law of physics itself, which Lowery also goes into, right? That we all abide by the laws of physics because no one can change the laws of physics. And in a similar way, he asserts, and I agree, that we will all ultimately have to abide by the law of Bitcoin because, like physics, it is unalterable, it is unchangeable, right? When you can't bend the rules, you just have to play by the rules. And so kinetic warfare was us playing by the rules of physics, right? How many people can we kill and with what technologies to assert our dominion? Whereas Bitcoin is more like how much energy can we project in terms of operational and capital expenditure into the Bitcoin mining network to determine who owns what, right? Who has what share of the money supply.
One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world. My thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is much more clear. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from 1,473 human trials conducted over a period of 32 years. So if you're looking to start enhancing your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to legacy health insurance. Now let's face it, legacy health insurance is an absolute scam. Nobody can explain this better than the legendary comedian Chris Rock.
Insurance. You got to have some insurance. You got to. There's an insurance. They shouldn't even call it insurance. They should just call it in case shit. Like, I give a company some money in case shit happens. Now, if shit don't happen, shouldn't I get my money back?
So with CrowdHealth, instead of just paying premiums that you'll never see again, you can hold part of this pool of savings in dollars and in Bitcoin through CrowdHealth. And when you have a health event, you can draw against this pool of communal savings. So go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove to learn more or sign up.
You mentioned military memetics. Bitcoin is obviously just this idea, right? This self-propagating, reproducing informational structure. Is this just the ultimate meme that we're saying that, we've talked about these ideals for, again, centuries, right? The Magna Carta, life, liberty, and inviolable property. But now we have taken that imaginal or informational structure and we implemented it into an actual technological reality. Is that why this meme is propagating?
Absolutely. And so humanity was given a perfect weapon, a godlike weapon. Okay. And so, I believe Jason Lowery used weapon on purpose. I believe if he would have used some other dumbed down phrase, he probably wouldn't have got as much media publicity over it. People wouldn't have been shocked and awed, right? It's part of the chaos that people have to wake up from. And so in essence, right, and no pun intended here, but like Jason Lowery is saying, hey, you bunch of domesticated pussies, you were given the perfect weapon to fight tyranny with, and here you are still fighting over an ETF, right? Like in essence, that's what it breaks down to, in my opinion, right? Because he says, right, humanity is going to become so tired of being systematically exploited at unprecedented scales through their computer networks by an elite, tyrannical, and technocratic ruling class that they're going to invent a new form of digital warfare and use it to fight zero trust, permissionless, and egalitarian access to cyberspace and its associated resources. Now, Jason Lowery has a duty to the Constitution. He doesn't have a duty to the central bankers. He doesn't have a duty to these different political figures. His duty is to the Constitution, which he has clearly stated out. So people calling Jason Lowery a spook are Bitcoin normies that don't really understand the battle, and they need to wake up, right? Because the only way, like I love this other quote, a right to an individual's property cannot be enforced without the right of the individual to physically defend that property. Ergo, the individual's right to bear arms to protect their life, liberty, and property, as it is important as a nation's sovereign right to protect its population, laws, and property. Okay? Retired Navy Captain Dave Corley is attributed with that quote. But, 2500 BC, Genesis 47, slaves owned by Pharaoh were required to pay him 20% of their income, their cropped harvest. Okay, this is a battle as old as time. 2022, the median U.S. taxpayer pays 24.8% income tax along with 7.65 FICA taxes on his taxed income. He then pays sales tax, property tax, gas tax, and many other taxes. And so really, you're in a system of slavery. There's nobody coming to save you. You were given a weapon. Now, no one's going to tell you that, right? You have to internally realize you've reached your red line, okay? This is a revolution. This is digital 1776. Jason Lowery is giving us the manual on how to execute and wield that power. Okay. But again, it all comes back to what you're saying, legitimacy. This is a battle over legitimacy. And, are you going to continue paying taxes to a dementia, flated pedophile in the White House? Or are you going to take your power back and become a sovereign individual and debase the state and their tyranny? Right. And, that's, here's another quote that I love to put out there, but I believe it is the duty of each of us to act as if the fate of the world depended on him. Admittedly, one man by himself cannot do the job. However, one man can make a difference. We must live for the future of the human race and not for our own comfort or success, right? That's Hyman Rickover. And so how do we change the balance of power, right? Forever. There's no going back after this, right? The infinite player has been turned into a finite player. They have to win this battle. They have to get the CBDC. They have to defeat Bitcoin. It's either 100% slavery or 100% freedom. I'm sorry for the normies in the middle. Like, you want to pay a little bit of taxes. You want to the freedom is scary. I get it, but there's no other way to fight this.
Yeah. Okay. Clearly you've laid out a very compelling call to arms here.
I have.
However, the call to arms is different this time, right? Because the arms themselves it's that opt-out, right? It's Bitcoin. It's the peaceful weapon, the weapon of peace.
Peaceful revolution.
Again, have no faith in Constitution. There is no bloody revolution. So this is the bloodless revolution.
Correct.
Yet that is a very radical statement, and it's a radical call to action for most people, especially those that are still plugged into the matrix of mainstream media, central bank propaganda, et cetera, et cetera. And it's something that's been conditioned into people over centuries, right? We've been living under systems like this for centuries, as you just highlighted, from ancient god king pharaohs who were expropriating taxes from slaves, which was actually a lower percentage than what the average American taxpayer pays today, as you just pointed out. What would you say to these people that are maybe hearing this and thinking, wow, okay, I agree, it's a compelling case, but I am scared. I am scared to embark on this journey. I am scared of the state, the predations of the state. I just want my normal, stable life. I've got a job to protect and family and kids to provide for. This is just too radical, too much. Leave me plugged into the matrix. Like, what would you say to those who are scared to take up this call to peaceful arms?
The only fear one has is that of fear itself. Okay. And so I'm going to quote Thomas Paine: tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Okay. And so I get it. It is scary, right? We are going into unprecedented times. Okay. But nobody's going to make it easy for us in that sense, right? Nobody's going to come and save you. And so you're eventually going to be forced into this scenario, right? I'm not forcing it. The government and the tyrannicals at B are forcing it. And so everybody has their breaking point, right? Before that first shot gets fired digitally, peacefully, right? This is a peaceful revolution. And so eventually everybody's going to have their fed up moment. They're going to have their red line. Some of us have reached that red line a little bit quicker. Some of us see this as a military plan that we all have to work on together as united individuals to fight them. Again, we're fighting worldwide underneath a common flag against a central enemy that we know has been there for a very long time. And so, again, I'm not looking for everybody. I don't need everybody. I need those that are willing and understand the battle we're in to defeat them once and for all. And so once we get that threshold, Robert, the masses are going to come, right? I'm not really concerned about that. I'm out there to wake up the lions, right? I'm out there to wake up the individuals who are kind of thinking about this, but maybe don't really understand the whole battle plan here because they're still thinking, maybe Jason's a spook. Maybe, these Q people are crazy. Maybe Trump is still this crazy person. But if you put it all this 40,000 foot view, it becomes very clear on what exactly is possibly going on in the background. And so, but like Robert F. Kennedy said, you've got kids, you've got a job, you've got this, I get it. But what's worse than dying? What's worse than losing your job? If you die and your kids live in a system of total enslavement, what is your purpose here on this planet? And I ask that self because I believe a lot of us have a calling. We don't necessarily understand this calling, right? But we are here to fight, right, in a bloodless battle. And our battle is not against flesh and blood, right? Our battle is against the evil powers that be. And so, people have to understand their power. People have to take that power back. Because, freedom is not something that should be just given away. It has to be earned. It has to be understood. And so, when people finally get to that moment, I think they will understand this and be like, wow, it was sitting there all along.
It's well said. A lot came up for me as you were saying that. One is, I think this is Thomas Jefferson's crest. I hope I'm saying this correctly, but he said that, or on that crest, it is written, "Rebellion to tyranny is obedience to God." Right? This is our nature. We are rational beings, right? We are self-owned and self-controlled. We should not submit to any authority other than our own. And I agree, Knut von Holm has sort of popularized this recently, that you either take the orange pill voluntarily or you'll be taking the orange suppository later, right? It's the predations of the state via taxation and inflation are not going to stop, right? If you just use history as your guide, they always push it until everyone's at a red line, and then you have a social revolt, right? So That's coming, whether you like it or not, right? You might not be interested in war, but war's interested in you. The war's at your doorsteps.
Correct.
And I think, the people that have kids, that have jobs, that have stability, that don't want to be a part of this, there's another, I don't know who said this, but there's a great quote that said that if there be trouble, let it be in my day so that my children may know peace. So to those that are fearful, think about your children. Think about the world they're going to inherit, and think about the legacy you're going to leave in their lives, right? When they look back and say, okay, this was happening. The evidence was overwhelming that things were changing, to say the least. What did my father do? What did my mother do? Yep. So you have to consider that. And this is another, we're just throwing out quotes left and right here, but
love it.
There was one I saw at ARC. I was at ARC Forum this past week in London, which is, Jordan Peterson's consortium it's intended to be like the anti-World Economic Forum, right? An international consortium centered on traditional values. And there was a quote he put up by Bob Dylan, and it said, "A hero is someone who understands the responsibility that comes with their freedom." So not only must freedom be earned, but the other side of that coin is responsibility, right? With great power comes great responsibility. So if you're going to have a transition of power from centralized social institutions to the people, there's going to be a simultaneous and inexorable transfer of responsibility, right? That you have to take responsibility for your own life, for the lives of your loved ones, and understand that no one is coming to save you, right? No matter what platitudes or propaganda you may have accepted in the past, it's simply not true, right? The reality of human action is that we're each responsible for our own actions. So for you, you're saying that you don't need everybody. We don't need the masses. We need to awaken the lions.
Mm-hmm.
For those lions that are becoming awakened, or maybe getting close to being awakened, what are the specific action items or next steps that you would suggest for them?
Now, I'm not going to suggest people do specific things, right? I'm going to give ideas of how we fight a war against them, right? And this goes down to people's soul, right? Because we've been dealing with endless lies, endless wars, endless inflation, endless printing, like literally endless oppression, you guys. Who is going to put an end to the endless? Okay. So that is obviously taking self-custody of your Bitcoin. Okay. Now, the second part of this is going to be not so easy for everybody to say. You are going to have to opt out of taxation at every level you can. Okay. And this is because you need to not only store your energy, but you need to tell them no. Okay. Because consent is energy. Okay. Your energy consenting to tyranny gives them more power in a spiritual sense. Okay. Some of us are not going to kneel to the God King anymore. Okay. So my call to arms is think of yourself as an individual and what you're willing to do to put yourself on the line, right? If you don't risk anything, if you have no skin in the game, then what does the other side of this thing look like? Mm-hmm. You know, people put their lives, their fortunes, and their entire systems against the redcoats, right? If they got caught, they were immediately strung up in a tree and killed, and they were instantly put to death back in the day. So if you're not willing to give up maybe a little jail time or maybe something else to provide freedom and, non-slavery for the rest of your children's lives, I can't make that decision for you. That is a very individualistic person's ideal that they have to make. I'm telling you, there's other people out there that are willing to do that are doing that are saying no, that will refuse to kneel, and that will take this war directly. And again, we die on this hill, Robert. Like, we die on this hill, and non-kinetically, right? Peacefully. But I will no longer consent to tyranny. Okay. And once Bitcoiners understand that this battle is not just about hedging inflation, this battle is not just about a Bitcoin ETF, this battle is the oldest of time. We have help from our military, most likely, right, that are preventing the red lines of full nuclear war, full civil war, and they're pushing us into this digital battlefield. and they're throwing out a lot of information and disinformation. You have to use discernment, but in essence, it's pulling out the best of us. Okay, you are the new elite, right? The Bitcoiners are going to be the new elite, right? In some sense of the word, whatever that means. But in reality, like, people need to get in touch with their own energy, right? What is your energy telling you to do? Is your energy telling you that you should be paying taxes to a pedophile in the White House because you're scared to go to jail? You're gonna live your life in constant fear of a God King because of your comfortableness in your home and in your thing. Like, some of us, I think, want more than that. And some of us are willing to put ourselves out there to be that bridge to help other people get across, because we need more people, we need more lions, but there's a lot of us out there already. And so, bridging the gap between, what's funny about this too, is that the people in the patriotic movement, right? The people that seem to be more right-wing, that refuse to vax, they look at Bitcoin like a mark of the beast. Okay. They look at Bitcoin as like the antithesis of the digital slavery. They don't understand it. And then you've got Bitcoiners over here who understand kind of the financial battle, but they don't understand this 1,000-year-old battle of corruption. But the thing is when we merge these two groups, like, we become unstoppable. But the problem is that everybody's stuck in their echo chambers. Everybody's emotional and has their current things. The patriotic crowd wants to vote in 2024. Voting is not going to save you. Trump will probably not. They will probably rig the election again. Bitcoiners in essence are mathematical, maxis. Right. So for some Bitcoiners to say that, elections aren't stolen, like, it's mathematically impossible to get 100% of the votes at 3 a.m., in an election cycle. And so there's certain mathematical equations that Bitcoiners need to settle with, not only on the Bitcoin side, but on reality side with our vote, because voting is in essence just like the money printer. They control the ledger. They control the entire system of control. And so when you're voting on a centralized ledger that they own, of course, they're going to come up with reasons to exploit that, right? Oh, we had a water leak, we had a gas leak, we had to shut down the polling station. Like, they can use every excuse in the book, and so you're not going to win this battle through traditional voting. Like, the revolutionaries didn't vote their way out of 1776. They picked up weapons and fired against the enemy with kinetic weapons. They had to fight. They had to put everything on the line to defeat this enemy. We need to start thinking in those terms. We need to understand the battlefield. We need to understand the 40,000-foot view that, hey guys, this is our path forward to defeat the state.
Yeah, and thank God that the arms are, again, Bitcoin is a weapon of peace, right? That the bloody revolution will just never work, right? Even if it appears to work in the short run, or even in the medium term, right? You could argue that the United States was a very successful economic story because of the decentralization it implemented into its governance structure, once it gained independence from Great Britain. But again, it's in decline, right? It's now an imperialistic empire in decline. So it was not a final solution to that problem. It was just kind of a stopgap measure, some incremental progress, perhaps. It got us to the internet. It got us to Bitcoin. But what we're talking about with Bitcoin is something fundamentally new, right? That we can pick up arms that are not physically, kinetically harmful. It is just really an expression of individual sovereignty, saying no more tyranny, right? I do not consent to this.
Do not consent. Absolutely.
Right. I consent to a consensual network, this consensual public infrastructure of private property exchange that is Bitcoin. And so I like the framing, Bitcoiners as becoming a non-predatory, civilized, peace-loving elite, right? And elite's obviously a very dirty word these days.
Right.
But it's not, there's nothing wrong with being elite, right? You want to be an elite athlete. You want to be an elite entrepreneur. You want to be good, right? In whatever domain you're operating in, you want to be the best. But the problem is the predation. It's the lack of civility. It is the warmongering. Those are the connotations associated with elite that are the real problem. And so Bitcoin lets us unplug from that matrix. As you said, it brings an end to otherwise endless inflation, and inflation equals overgrowth of centralized power structures. So Let's try to end this. This is all big and radical and perhaps scary for some people. Let's try to end this on a high note here.
Yeah.
What does the post-digital 1776 world look like? What are we to be hopeful for? What are we fighting for? What is the unifying vision that is Bitcoin, and what future are we trying to usher into existence?
Well, imagine, if you will, a society were to discover a way to write down policies on C++ instead of parchment paper, and then enforce and secure those policies using physically harmless electrical power. Right? So we no longer need to trust politicians. We no longer need to trust the state, right? Like, this becomes a pure voluntary society. Of course, we are going to opt in to collective agreements of protection of things in society, right? That we voluntarily want to be a part of, right? And so right now we're non-voluntarily being ushered into wars we don't partake in. We're not, in control of all the different propaganda and institutional programs that have forced, I hate to say it, but these trans agendas reading to our children, and you've got big pharma pushing, vaccines down our throats, and you've got all these state power. Their state power comes from the monetary system, the dollar. And so all that ends. And that's the beautiful thing, Robert. We get to create this new world. It's our world to create. And if we eliminate some of this evil and we give that power back to the people that are aligned incentives with furthering humanity's goals of a peaceful, egalitarian society, it's a beautiful future, Robert. Some people may say, oh, it's all puppy dogs and unicorns, but like literally we can almost get to that. Like, we don't have scarcity anymore, right? We don't have famine. We don't have, homeless. We don't have people that are starving. Like, we can actually fix a lot of the problems, because scarcity is an introduced tool by the fiat bankers to attempt to game us into, becoming these ever these slaves that are just constantly working for the next big thing, because we're incentivized by consumerism and all this other crazy stuff. But the future is beautiful. The future is bright. I've already won this war. It just hasn't ticked on, or hasn't clicked in people's heads yet to becoming this new society. But governments become service providers. We can go we don't even need borders at some point, right? Because everybody's going to be competing with your Bitcoin. They want you to move to El Salvador where there's no taxes already, right? Argentina, before the election, said, hey, we're going to get rid of taxes if you don't vote for, Javier Milei. Like, it's already debasing the state. And so you can see where it's happening, but that's the beautiful thing. We don't know what the future looks like. We get to create it, though. And we want the best, we want the brightest, we want the boldest. And those that are willing to say no, I want those people on my team creating that new future. I want people like you helping me create that new future. And so, no, I think we should end it on a high note. It's a beautiful future, and we have nothing but freedom to gain.
Beautifully said. G-Money, this has been one heck of a conversation. Probably one of the most radical I've ever had on this show. I'm really anxious to hear feedback from people. These are very uncertain times, but, again, thank God we have the greatest tool of certainty that has ever existed, which is just Bitcoin, right? Perfectly fair rules, perfectly transparent, perfect information. It really is this beacon of certitude in a sea of uncertainty. This is awesome. Again, thank you for doing this. G-Money, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on Twitter at GMoneyPepe. Now, the Pepe is not for Pepe coin. People need to understand the esoteric names of Pepe being introduced into the Bitcoin blockchain. We can get into that maybe some other episode, but Pepe is actually kind of very important to this in a spiritual sense. So not the shit coin, right? And so G-Money Pepe is my Twitter handle. I'm also the host of Rug Pull Radio every Thursday night on Rumble. We're on Rumble, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, okay, on Badlands Media. You can also find us on Telegram at Bullion Bitcoin BS, where we have about 11,000 other people on there. And so, we've got a great patriotic lion's den to where, we welcome people, but we're attempting to wake the masses into this battle and move forward.
Beautiful. GMoney, thank you again.
Thank you, brother.